Jonathan Miller adjusted a faded baseball cap, pulled low over his brow as he stepped to the front door of Harper's Grill, the very first restaurant he had ever opened in the quiet town of Brookville. The bell above the door chimed, a sound that used to feel like home. But today, nobody even looked up. Perfect. The disguise was working. Old jeans, scuffed boots, a wrinkled flannel shirt, and 3 days' worth of stubble made him look nothing like the polished CEO who now owned 12 locations across the state. 15 years ago, this place had been his everything, a tiny local diner with peeling paint and a broken sign. He had built it from nothing, brick by brick, customer by customer, but success had a price. He had spent the last few years lost in corporate meetings, expansion plans, and investor calls, far from the kitchen where it all began. And yet, something had been nagging at him. The numbers on paper didn't lie. Revenue at Brookville's flagship location had quietly dipped. Employee turnover had spiked. And worst of all, the soul of this place, the heart that used to beat loudly behind every plate of food, felt distant. Today wasn't about profit. Today wasn't about business strategy. Today was about the truth. Jonathan went to the counter, sliding onto the last seat near the kitchen line, a perfect spot to observe without drawing attention. The lunch rush was in full swing. Servers hustled between tables. The kitchen rang with the familiar clatter of pots and shouted orders. On the surface, everything looked normal, but Jonathan had learned long ago, the real story is always in the details you don't see. And then he saw him, Walter Evans, an elderly man, thin, stooped, maybe late 60s, quietly washing dishes in the back corner of the kitchen. He moved slowly, but deliberately. Careful hands, kind eyes, and unlike anyone else in the chaotic restaurant, Walter didn't rush. He respected every plate, every glass, every piece of silverware. Jonathan watched as customers passing by the dish station greeted Walter by name, and the old man responded with a gentle smile and a soft word. This was not just a dishwasher. This man mattered here, but not to everyone. From the far side of the counter, two younger employees, a cashier named Kyle Peterson and a girl named Rachel Moore, whispered with sour expressions. They cast sneering glances at Walter, laughing under their breath. And then Jonathan heard it, not just casual gossip, but something darker, something cold, something that made his stomach twist. In that moment, sitting at the same counter where he had once dreamed of building something honest and real, Jonathan Miller realized he hadn't just come back to check on his restaurant. He had come back to save it. Jonathan sat still at the counter, his hands wrapped around a plain white coffee mug that had been refilled twice, maybe 3 times now. But he wasn't tasting anything. His eyes, sharp beneath the brim of that weathered cap, stayed locked on Walter Evans. There was something about the old man's rhythm, something about the quiet dignity of his every motion that refused to blend into the noise around him. Walter was a dishwasher, but not in the way most people thought of dishwashers. He moved like a craftsman, like someone who understood, better than anyone else here, that respect didn't come from your job title. It came from how you did your work when no one was watching. And Walter had been doing this long before kids like Kyle and Rachel had ever punched a time card. Jonathan leaned back slightly, pretending to check his phone, but just listening. From the other end of the counter, Kyle's voice broke through the clatter of plates. "I swear," Kyle scoffed, shaking his head toward Rachel, "if I have to cover for that old man one more time, I'm gonna lose it." Rachel rolled her eyes, popping a piece of gum between words. He should have retired like 20 years ago. I don't get why Linda even lets him stay. Jonathan's jaw tightened, not visibly, just enough of the muscles in his neck to feel the weight of restraint. But Walter never reacted. Not 15 minutes later, Jonathan watched him do something extraordinary and heartbreakingly simple. A young mother, no older than 30, shuffled toward the register, her toddler tugging at her sleeve. Jonathan could see it immediately, the body language of someone trying to hold herself together. She spoke to Rachel in a whisper Jonathan couldn't catch, but the meaning was obvious. Short on cash. Embarrassed. Rachel didn't even try to hide her annoyance. "You gotta be kidding me," Rachel muttered just loud enough for the woman and everyone nearby to hear. But Walter had heard too. Without hesitation, the old man quietly wiped his hands on his already damp apron, shuffled over behind the counter, and slipped a few folded bills into Rachel's hand. "Here," Walter said softly, eyes kind but steady. "She's good." The young woman's eyes welled up with disbelief. She mouthed thank you like someone who wasn't used to kindness. Jonathan's throat tightened. But Kyle, Rachel, they just snickered as soon as Walter turned his back. "Bet he lives in that junkyard car of his," Kyle sneered. "Old fool's gonna go broke saving strays." Jonathan felt heat rise behind his eyes, not from anger alone, but from something deeper. Shame, because these were his employees, his store, his culture. This didn't happen overnight. This was a result of absence, of trusting the wrong people to set the tone. But he wasn't here to lecture them. Not yet. He was here to understand. He watched as the lunch rush died down and Walter, still moving with his quiet, deliberate pace, began cleaning areas of the kitchen nobody else touched. Corners thick with dust, grime under equipment, grease traps that should have been handled by the night crew but clearly weren't. Everywhere Jonathan looked, Walter was covering for people who wouldn't lift a finger for him. He worked past his shift, past when his body told him to stop. Jonathan saw it, the way Walter pressed his hand against the small of his back when he thought nobody was looking. Arthritis, probably, old injuries, but no complaints, no excuses. When the last of the afternoon crowd filtered out, Jonathan left cash on the counter, more than enough to cover his meal, and slipped out the front door quietly. But he didn't leave. Not really. He moved to his car parked 2 blocks away, waited until Walter finally emerged nearly an hour later, long after Kyle and Rachel had clocked out, and followed him. Walter walked slowly, shoulders slightly hunched, across the fading streets of Brookville, past closed shops and empty benches. And then he turned down a gravel side road behind an abandoned lot toward a small mobile home that looked like it had fought through 20 winters too many. Jonathan parked far enough away to avoid suspicion, but close enough to see everything. A rusted-out old Buick, a cracked window patched with tape, flickering porch light. It wasn't just humble, it was barely livable. Walter disappeared inside without a fanfare, without bitterness. Just a man, alone, doing his best. Jonathan sat there for a long time, long after the porch light went dark, long after the sounds of the town faded away, because now he knew this wasn't about a paycheck. This wasn't about staff turnover or profit margins. This was about a man named Walter Evans, who deserved better. And Jonathan Miller had built this empire on the promise that people like Walter would always have a place. Tomorrow, that promise would be tested. Tomorrow, he would find out just how far Kyle and Rachel were willing to go, and whether this place, the very heart of Harper's Grill, could still be saved. That night, long after the last customer had left Harper's Grill, after the neon sign outside flickered into the quiet hum of Brookville's empty streets, Jonathan Miller sat alone in his car. But he wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. His eyes were locked on one man, the same frail figure he had quietly watched all day, Walter Evans. Walter's shift had ended hours ago, and yet there he was, still inside, still cleaning. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, his heart tightening. Most employees would have rushed home, clocked out the second they could, but Walter stayed behind. He scrubbed the grease trap, a job nobody wanted, wiped down forgotten corners, straightened chairs one by one, not because anyone told him to, but because that's just who he was. A man who cleaned up everyone else's mess. A man who gave long after he had nothing left for himself. Finally, near midnight, Walter shuffled out the back door of Harper's Grill, his shoulders hunched. His steps were slow and cautious, like every movement carried weight far beyond his fragile bones. Jonathan quietly started his engine, kept his headlights off, and followed through the cracked sidewalks of Brookville, past the shuttered windows of closed shops, into a part of town few people noticed or cared to remember. Walter's rusted mobile home sat wedged behind the old Brookville market. Tucked away like an afterthought, the metal siding was bruised and buckled. One of the small windows was patched with duct tape. A single porch light flickered faintly, barely fighting off the night. Jonathan killed the engine, sat there in silence. He watched Walter struggle with the door, shoulder checking it open like a man who had fought too many losing battles with life. Inside, a faint glow of a lamp, bare walls, sparse furniture, no signs of comfort, no pictures, no family, just survival. Jonathan's throat tightened. This wasn't just poverty. This was sacrifice, painfully earned, quietly endured. The next day, Jonathan returned, but not to the restaurant. Not yet. Instead, he spent the morning walking the town, talking to people who knew Walter Evans. At the pharmacy, an older woman whispered, lost his wife to cancer, sold their house for the treatment. He's been living back there ever since. Never complains, never asks for help. At the gas station, the attendant added, he sends money every month to the hospital that treated her. Says he owes them for giving him a few more months with the love of his life. At the local coffee shop, a retired mechanic, one of Walter's oldest friends, summed it up best. Walter? He's too proud to quit, too kind to turn anyone away, and too honest for this world. Jonathan sat back in his car that afternoon, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He stared at the restaurant in the distance. Harper's Grill, his legacy, his name. And yet, here was a man, a living, breathing reminder of everything that should matter, being treated like an invisible part of the furniture, mocked by the young, ignored by management, suffering in silence. Jonathan clenched the steering wheel. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. That night, he returned to Harper's Grill not as the owner, but as a man on a mission, a man ready to uncover every shadow in his own house and protect the one person who embodied everything good, everything human, everything worth saving. Walter Evans, the dishwasher no one noticed, but a man Jonathan Miller would never, ever forget. Jonathan sat quietly at the corner table of Harper's Grill, his coffee growing cold, but his thoughts burning hotter by the minute. Every moment he stayed undercover. The cracks in this place deepened, not in the walls or the kitchen tiles, but in something far worse, the hearts of his employees. Kyle Peterson and Rachel Moore, two young cashiers, two faces that should have represented the spirit of this place, but now they were the shadows darkening its soul. Jonathan's sharp eyes caught them again, not rushing to help a customer, not cleaning their stations, not even checking on the elderly Walter Evans, who at that very moment was quietly picking up a tray a nervous teenager had dropped near the back. Instead, they were whispering, heads bowed together, laughing softly, scheming. Jonathan could feel it in his bones. The same cold calculation he'd seen in boardrooms, the same hunger for gain at the expense of decency. But here, in Harper's Grill, this wasn't business competition. This was betrayal. He leaned in, pretended to scroll through his phone, while their voices floated over, careless in their cruelty. I'm telling you, Rachel, Kyle's voice was slick, coated in that fake charm he wore like his cheap cologne. We get rid of that old man, we free up hours, we bring in my cousin for a job, and we split the referral bonus. Rachel Moore snorted under her breath. That's the easiest money we'll make all year. Plus, I'm sick of looking at him shuffling around like some charity case. Jonathan's jaw clenched. It wasn't just about money to them. It was contempt. Pure, bitter contempt for a man who quietly lived with dignity, who gave everything while asking for nothing. He's always pulling out cash for those broke customers, Rachel whispered darkly, covering bills like he's some saint. Kyle grinned. Well, we're about to make him a fallen one. Jonathan's heart sank. They weren't just planning to complain about Walter. They were going to frame him, set him up, get him fired. They already think there's missing cash, Kyle continued, lowering his voice but still audible. Patricia and Linda have been stressing about the drawer being off. Patricia, the regional supervisor, wasn't here often, but Linda Gomez, the floor manager, she was right here. A kind woman, yes, but overwhelmed, distracted, managing too many things at once. She doesn't check the cameras because half of them don't even work, Rachel added. Easy. Jonathan shook his head in disbelief. Kyle's plan was methodical. First, he'd create small shortages, miscount change here, void a sale there. Then, when the missing total grew, they'd wait until Walter, kind-hearted as always, stepped up to help someone in need. And they'd spin it, turn his kindness into a crime. That old fool has no idea what's coming. Kyle laughed. Tomorrow, lunch rush, will make it look perfect. Rachel leaned in with a venomous smirk. Hope he enjoyed his last shift. Jonathan stared down at the table. His reflection was barely visible on the polished surface. This wasn't just about protecting Walter anymore. This was about protecting what Harper's Grill was meant to be. A place of trust. A place of second chances. A place where the quiet kindness of a dishwasher meant more than the empty greed of two bitter cashiers. He couldn't expose them yet, not without proof, not without setting a trap so undeniable that even Kyle and Rachel couldn't lie their way out. He pulled out his phone, his voice low, steady. Linda, it's me, Jonathan. No time to explain. Tomorrow, I need full access to back cameras. And I'll need one more thing. That night, Jonathan drove past the old trailer where Walter lived. That lonely mobile home behind Brookville's forgotten market. Lights barely flickered inside. A man who had lost everything, but never lost himself. Jonathan promised, staring out at the humble outline of Walter Evans's home. Tomorrow, I fight for you. Tomorrow, everything changes. Jonathan returned the next morning, arriving just after the lunch rush when the restaurant had settled into its familiar hum. His disguise remained the same, old jacket, baseball cap, unshaven face, but his eyes held a colder focus now. He wasn't just observing anymore. Today, the plan would begin. Sarah Collins entered Harper's Grill at 2:37 p.m., right on time. She wore a faded blue dress, one sleeve carefully stitched at the shoulder. Her little boy, Caleb, clutched her hand. They looked like any struggling mother and child trying to get by, and that was exactly the point. Jonathan watched from his usual booth near the corner. The afternoon sun poured through the wide front windows, casting long golden stripes across the floor. Kyle stood behind the counter, lazily scrolling on his phone. Rachel was chatting with a waitress, laughing a bit too loudly. Neither of them noticed Sarah at first. When they did, their expressions barely masked the disdain. Sarah approached the register, her voice soft. Hi, just a kid's meal and a soup for me. Rachel tapped at the screen, chewing gum with a practiced boredom. That'll be $9.80. Sarah reached into her purse, slowly counting out a few bills. Then her shoulders slumped. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had enough. Her voice cracked slightly. Would you mind if I left the soup? Just a kid's meal, please. Rachel rolled her eyes but didn't say anything. From the back, Walter had seen it all. He stepped out from the dish station, wiping his hands on his apron. His face was tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones, but his eyes were still sharp. He looked at Sarah, then at the little boy staring at the menu, like it was a window into another world. Without hesitation, Walter reached into his pocket. No need to worry, ma'am, he said gently, handing Rachel a $10 bill. This one's on me. Rachel's lips curled in a fake smile. Again? she said loudly enough for a few nearby customers to hear. "Walter, you know we're not charity." "It's fine," Walter replied softly. "I've got it." Sarah mouthed a quiet thank you, her eyes filled with emotion that wasn't entirely acting. Then she and Caleb took a seat by the window, the little boy's face lighting up as the plate arrived. Jonathan watched every second, his jaw tight. The trap had been set. Minutes later, Kyle whispered something to Rachel. She glanced toward Walter, then at the register, then back at Kyle. The two nodded. Jonathan's pulse picked up. A few moments passed. Then Rachel let out a theatrical sigh. "Oh no, not again," she said loudly. Kyle stepped beside her, peering into the register drawer. "We're short." "How much?" Linda's voice called from across the room as she walked toward the front. $32, Kyle announced. "That's almost exactly the amount Walter covered yesterday and today." "Weird, huh?" Walter, still at the dish pit, froze mid-motion. He looked up slowly, not comprehending yet. Jonathan's hands clenched under the table. He kept still. Linda frowned. "That can't be right." The system matched after the lunch rush. "Maybe we should ask Walter why the drawer keeps coming up short," Rachel added sweetly. Now Walter's face changed, not just confusion, but something deeper. Hurt, shock, betrayal. Linda looked from Rachel to Kyle, then back to Walter. "Walter, have you been opening the register?" Her voice was strained. Walter stepped forward slowly, his hands trembling. "Yes, but only to help when someone couldn't pay. I always put my own money in. Ask Megan from last week or Marcus. I don't take anything out." Rachel crossed her arms. "You were the only one near the drawer when it came up short today." Kyle chimed in. "And last week, same story." "Because I was helping people," Walter said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Is that a crime now?" Linda's expression hardened. I can't ignore this anymore. Walter, I've received complaints from other staff too. We have a policy. You know that." Walter stared at her. His voice broke. "So, because I tried to do the right thing, I'm being punished for it?" Kyle gave a smug shrug. "Rules are rules, man." The restaurant had gone quiet. Even the guests could feel something was deeply wrong. One older man at a corner table set his fork down mid-bite. A waitress had tears in her eyes. Linda looked down, then back at Walter. "I have to ask you to clock out, Walter. Effective immediately." Silence. Walter stood motionless for several seconds. Then he nodded, slowly, like something inside him was cracking but wouldn't be shown. He didn't plead, didn't argue. He just turned and walked toward the back room. As he passed by Jonathan's table, their eyes met. And in that moment, a heartbeat no more, Jonathan saw everything. The sorrow, the dignity, the weariness of a man who had given all he had and now was walking away with nothing. It nearly broke him. Rachel turned to Kyle, barely containing her grin. "That went better than I thought." Jonathan stood. He didn't say a word, but the storm was coming. For a moment, Harper's grill fell into an eerie stillness. The hum of conversation, the clatter of plates, even the low background music seemed to fade into nothing. All eyes were glued to the small, hunched figure of Walter Evans, standing there quietly in front of the register, his wrinkled hands hanging by his sides, trembling slightly not from fear, but from the sheer weight of humiliation. Jonathan Miller sat at the far end of the dining room, heart pounding, fists clenched beneath the table. This was it. The line had been crossed. Kyle Peterson leaned against the counter with an arrogant smirk, arms folded as if he just scored the greatest victory of his short, pitiful career. Rachel Moore stood beside him, barely hiding her satisfaction, eyes cold and sharp like glass ready to cut. Linda Gomez, the shift manager, looked utterly conflicted, torn between her instinct to defend Walter and the overwhelming evidence Kyle and Rachel had staged so perfectly. Walter's voice broke the silence. Quiet, steady, but filled with the ache of betrayal. I have worked here for years. His voice caught. I've stayed late when no one asked me. I've cleaned what no one wanted to touch. And I helped every customer who needed it, not because I had much, but because kindness is free. His shoulders sank just a little. But if this is what people believe of me now, maybe I don't belong here anymore. The words hit Jonathan like a knife to the heart. This was not just about a man being falsely accused. This was about dignity being stripped away in front of strangers, about decency being crushed under the boots of greed. Kyle chuckled under his breath. Save the speech, old man. Maybe you can practice it in the unemployment line. Jonathan's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Everyone turned. Walter's tired eyes met Jonathan's for the first time. Confused, surprised, until realization began to dawn slowly in the room. Jonathan Miller took a steady breath. The mask of the stranger was gone. His posture straightened. No longer the casual, quiet customer, but the man who built Harper's grill with his own hands. Walter Evans is not leaving this place, Jonathan said, his voice clear, cutting through the tension like a blade. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Linda's mouth fell open. Mr. Miller? Kyle's smugness evaporated like smoke. Rachel's face drained of color. Walter, bewildered, simply stared, his lips parting in disbelief. Jonathan walked toward the center of the room. I'm Jonathan Miller, and I've been here for days, watching, listening, hoping this wasn't real. His eyes locked onto Kyle and Rachel. Hard, unflinching. But it is. And now, everyone is going to see the truth. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small remote. At that moment, the large TV mounted on the wall behind the bar flickered to life. Camera footage. Clear, unedited, damning. Hidden cameras, installed the very first night Jonathan returned undercover, began to roll. First, it showed Walter quietly slipping his own money into the register when Sarah Collins, the single mother Jonathan hired to test him, came up short. Then, it showed Kyle and Rachel in the back corner, whispering their scheme. The audio was painfully clear. If we make the register short enough, Linda will have to believe Walter is stealing. Get rid of him. Get my cousin in here. Referral bonus, easy money. The room erupted in gasps of shock and murmurs of disgust. Jonathan's voice rang out, controlled fury simmering beneath the surface. This is the culture you thought I built? A place where kindness is punished? Where greed tramples over decency? Kyle was frozen in place, sweat beading on his forehead. Rachel shook her head wildly. This isn't fair, this isn't. Jonathan cut her off. No, Rachel. What wasn't fair was watching an honorable man like Walter Evans go home after midnight to a broken-down trailer while you mocked him for having a heart. He turned to Linda. Call the Brookville police. Now! Linda didn't hesitate. Minutes later, the sound of police sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Jonathan walked over to Walter, whose eyes were now brimming with silent tears. I am so sorry, Walter, Jonathan said, his voice softer now, cracking at the edges. Not just for what happened here today, but for every day I wasn't here to protect people like you. Walter swallowed hard, shaking his head humbly. You didn't know. Jonathan smiled sadly. That's no longer an excuse. As the police entered and let a furious, shouting Kyle and a sobbing Rachel out of Harper's grill, the staff and customers stood in stunned silence. And then, slowly, a wave of applause rose from the dining room. But it wasn't for Jonathan. It was for Walter Evans, the quiet man who'd spent years doing the right thing, even when no one was watching, even when no one cared. Jonathan turned to his staff, his voice resolute. Things changed today. For good. And this was only the beginning. The entire Harper's Grill had fallen silent. Walter Evans stood there, still in his worn apron, shoulders heavy, hands slightly shaking not from fear, but from years of exhaustion and quiet endurance. And now vindicated, the truth had poured out like a flood. Kyle and Rachel had been escorted away. their names forever etched into the walls of shame they had built for themselves. But for Walter, this wasn't victory. This wasn't revenge. He didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He just stood there, small-weathered, but with a dignity that filled the entire restaurant more powerfully than any applause. Jonathan Miller watched him closely. For the first time in a long time, Jonathan felt something stir deeply inside him. This wasn't just about saving a business. This was about saving himself. He stepped closer. "Walter," Jonathan's voice broke the silence, low, steady, carrying to the heart of Harper's grill. The old man turned, those tired blue eyes meeting the CEO's without anger, without bitterness, just a quiet sadness. "I owe you so much more than apology." Jonathan's throat tightened. "I owe you respect. I owe you honor. And I owe you back the years this place should have been protecting you, not failing you." Walter shook his head gently, his voice as rough as gravel but as kind as any father's. "I didn't help people expecting anything back, Mr. Miller. I just didn't know how to stop being me." That sentence, that humility, struck Jonathan harder than any accusation ever could. But he wasn't here just to apologize. Jonathan raised his hand, signaling to the entire staff and to Linda Gomez, who was still standing in shock, tears brimming in her eyes. He turned to face Walter fully. "Starting today, I am officially promoting you, Walter Evans, to guest experience manager for the entire Harper's Grill system." The words seemed to hang in the air like something unreal. Gasps, wide eyes, silence, and then a ripple of stunned emotion spread through the restaurant. Walter blinked, disbelieving. "Sir, I'm just a dishwasher," he whispered. Jonathan shook his head. "No, you are the soul of this place, and no title on earth could truly capture that. But we're going to start showing it every single day." Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. He pressed it into Walter's hand. Inside is the deed to a new apartment right here in downtown Brookville. No more living in that mobile home. No more worrying about the cold nights. You deserve a home, Walter. Walter's breath caught. His lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. "And the hospital bills?" Jonathan added softly. "Paid in full. You don't owe anyone a single dime anymore." It was too much. Walter's shoulders shook, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming release of carrying a mountain of pain for far too long. Tears slipped quietly down his worn face. And yet, he never lost his composure. Instead, in front of every staff member, every customer, every witness to this extraordinary moment, Walter did the only thing a man like him knew how to do. He reached out his callous hand and simply said, with a voice choked by years of silence, "Thank you for seeing me." Jonathan gripped his hand firmly. "It's about time, Walter." And then, turning to the entire staff, to Linda, who stood weeping quietly at the register, to the young servers who looked at Walter now as something far more than just an old man washing dishes, Jonathan spoke the words that would change Harper's Grill forever. "Starting today, we're implementing new policies across every location. Living wages for every employee, emergency support funds for anyone in crisis, and a commitment." He paused, eyes fierce with conviction. A commitment to never again let good people go unseen, to never again let kindness be overlooked. The customers erupted into applause. But the loudest sound of all was the beating of hearts changed forever by the quiet man they had almost lost. Walter Evans had given everything he had, not to earn glory, but simply because he believed kindness mattered. And now, kindness had finally found its way back to him. Jonathan turned to him one last time, and Walter, the old man, looked up. "You're not just staying here because I'm giving you a title. You're staying because this place will never be the same without you." Walter smiled, soft, genuine, full of the quiet grace that had always been his greatest power. And as Jonathan looked around Harper's Grill, now filled with people wiping away tears, Standing taller, feeling prouder, he knew this wasn't just a restaurant. This was family, built not on profits, not on systems, but on people like Walter Evans, who made the world better without anyone ever asking him to. And now, everyone would know his name. Walter Evans stood in the middle of Harper's Grill, but this time, not as a quiet, overlooked dishwasher hiding behind a sink of dirty plates. No, today, he stood as the heart of the restaurant, the soul everyone had almost forgotten until his quiet goodness forced them all to remember. The restaurant was filled, not just with curious locals who'd heard the story overnight, but with faces softened by respect, by pride, and even by a quiet kind of guilt. They had walked past Walter for years. They had let him fade into the noise of their busy lives. But not today. Jonathan Miller stood beside him, not in disguise now, but as himself. No longer a man hiding behind success, but a man owning his failure and determined to make it right. He placed a hand on Walter's shoulder, firm, steady. Walter, Jonathan's voice echoed to the restaurant. You taught me something I forgot along the way. That true leadership, true success, it's not about how many restaurants I open, or how much money is in the register. He paused, locking eyes with his staff, with every employee from the cooks to the servers who had gathered around, listening in silence. It's about people like you. People give when no one's watching, who help not for praise, but because it's simply the right thing to do. Walter's eyes shimmered, not with pride, but with quiet humility. His hands, rough, cracked from years of hard labor, twitched nervously at his sides. I'm just doing what anyone should do, Walter whispered. But Jonathan shook his head, his voice stronger now. No, Walter, what you've done, day after day, year after year, that's rare. That's what makes Harper's Grill more than just a business. Jonathan turned to the crowd, to the regular customers who had been sitting at their tables, watching. Some had tears in their eyes. Others gave small nods, because they knew it was true. This man is not just the soul of Harper's Grill. He's a reminder that kindness matters, that doing the right thing matters, even when no one else sees it. There was a hush, and then, slowly, people began to clap. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. It was honest, pure, from the kitchen staff to the elderly couple at table 3, to the mother with her children near the window, who Walter had once quietly paid for without saying a word. It grew until the entire restaurant was standing, applauding a man who never asked for anything. Walter lowered his head, overwhelmed, for a moment. It looked like the years of struggle might finally break through his calm. His shoulders shook, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of love being returned to him tenfold. Jonathan raised his hand, waiting for the room to settle. I'm not just here to thank Walter with words, he continued. Today, we do things differently. He turned back to Walter, pulling a small envelope from his jacket. Walter Evans, from this day forward, you are no longer just our dishwasher. You are officially the customer experience manager of Harper's Grill, across all our locations. Gasps, whispers of disbelief, then cheers. Walter's lips parted, barely able to form words. I don't know what to say. Jonathan smiled. You don't have to say anything. You've already said everything that matters, through every small act of kindness you've given. But Jonathan wasn't done. He gestured, and from the kitchen, Linda Gomez, the manager, came forward with a set of keys. These are for you, Walter, Jonathan said. A new apartment right in the heart of Brookville. No more nights in that old mobile home. No more living in silence and struggle. Walter's hands trembled as he accepted the keys. And one last thing, Jonathan added, pulling a final document from his folder. Your wife's remaining medical debts paid in full. At that, Walter could no longer hold back. His quiet dignity cracked, but not in defeat. In release, tears, long held back, rolled down his weathered face. The entire restaurant was silent again, but this time it was a sacred silence. a moment that would live in every person's heart forever. Jonathan turned back to his employees. This is the future of Harper's Grill, a place where doing the right thing matters, where kindness is rewarded, where every single employee is family. He looked at Linda. At every location, starting today, we implement a new employee care policy, living wages, emergency funds, support for those who need it. He smiled faintly, because success means nothing if the people who build it are left behind. As the day went on, Harper's Grill wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It became something bigger. It became a symbol. Walter stayed, not because he had to, but because this place was home. He walked the restaurant floor that evening, not as forgotten dishwasher, but as a man seen, respected, and forever loved. Above the entrance of Harper's Grill, a new sign would soon hang. True worth isn't measured by what you take when no one's looking, but by what you give when no one is asking. And Brookville would never forget it. Sometimes in life, the quietest people carry the loudest lessons. Walter Evans didn't wear a suit. He didn't sit in a corner office. He didn't lead with words. He led with kindness. And the world almost missed him. We live in a time where noise wins attention, where titles command respect, where people measure success by what you have instead of who you are when no one's watching. But tonight, in a small diner in Brookville, the world learned something different. That true greatness is humble. That true strength is gentle. That true success is built in silence. With every small act of good we choose to do when no one is keeping score. Because character isn't loud. It doesn't demand the spotlight. It doesn't seek applause. But when kindness is tested, when goodness is betrayed, it will always find its way back into the light. Walter Evans didn't ask for recognition. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't even ask to be seen. But life has a quiet way of rewarding those who give, even when they have nothing left. Maybe that's a lesson for all of us. In a world chasing everything flashy and temporary, what will stay with people forever? It is how you made them feel. It is what you gave away freely with love. Not because you had to, but because it was right. So, if you're watching this tonight, and you wonder if the little things you do even matter, let Walter remind you, the world may not always see you, but someone does. And sometimes, that's more than enough.